I do these series just because over the years I've explored a lot of different spiritual and psychological and psycho-emotional practices and modalities, and I just wanted to pay it forward, share some of these treasures. And Ted and Hillary specifically, I got to know back in 2007, I believe, and just an amazing couple with their ability to support. Um, Individuals to go through their own healing and in relationships for people to see one another in new ways and themselves. Ted and Hillary have been exploring healing and awakening their full potential since 1995, and they've been married for 25 years. Their relationship began with a simple, clear agreement. They were committed to finding ways to speak and live their truth, no matter what the consequences for their relationship. No small thing. They say that they knew that if they couldn't live their truth, the relationship would not be worth it. That commitment drove them to explore the depths of love relationship and how to heal the negative conditioning that ultimately ruins most attempts at long term intimacy. It also led them to discover the meaning of learning to live in flow together. It's a way of being that grows naturally as a consequence of healing the core issues together. So, with that, I want to welcome Ted and Hillary to the call. It's so great to have you guys here. Welcome.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
It's great to
Appreciate
be
it.
here, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, well, lots to dive into on today's call, and I always like to make sure before we go too far into this. Can you guys hear me okay, nice and clear?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, great. You guys are coming through clear too. All right, well, so I like to start out with this since we talk about relationships and awakening and all that. The first thing I just would like to unpack, because there may be some people that don't even I have an idea of what awakening is. So I'd like to start first, kind of what you guys' relationship to that word awakening or awakened, and then awakened relationships is, and and then I'd like to dive a little bit more into like how you guys met and go from there.
Okay. Well, let me start on that. Um, when I first got into spiritual work, the word awakening meant to me the awakening of consciousness, the realization that I am the infinite awareness in the universe. So that's one way to say it. And I went heavily after that directly for years in the transcendental meditation movement and in other forms of Eastern, like Kriya Yoga and other forms of Eastern yoga. And eventually became relatively convinced after a massive effort that the attempt at awakening through just focusing on consciousness was kind of a mistake because it was leaving me undeveloped in relationship, undeveloped in relation to my body and my emotions, uh, not clear about my purpose. And there were other issues that just weren't being addressed through this endless focus on consciousness. So then, through the work with Waking Down and doing all the trainings of other teachers in Waking Down over many years, it became really clear to me that, and clearly to both of us, that yeah, right, it wasn't just about consciousness. It's what we call whole being awakening. It's about awakening in consciousness, our uniqueness, our mind, emotions, and body. And if we look at these five major domains, which clearly is related to the I conscious work that I have been co-founding with my partner in that work, what we're saying is that if you miss any of these five domains when considering what awakening is about, you're missing something so huge that it's going to hold back the awakening process. Because we need and want and are designed to grow and mature and awaken in an integrated way with all of our being growing at the same time. But due to various reasons, a lot having to do with conditioning from the past, many of us sort of get some various messages of repression in some domains and green lights in other domains. And so we start growing in whatever ways we can. And even if you find yourself having some major awakenings in consciousness, it's often very disappointing to come back to normal life from that and find yourself mired once again in relationship issues or work issues or some other way in which we're chronically unhappy or unfulfilled. So, anyway, that's a start at it. You want to say something?
Yeah. Well, I know when I first started my desire to awaken spiritually, it was in 79. And I came in with a lot of fear. I was really fear driven. As one psychic told me, I had shrunk my energy to the size of an almond in my childhood just to really, you know,
Yeah,
shrink myself.
yeah, wow.
And so fear has been a constant guide to me on my spiritual journey. So awakening to consciousness, to more and more of who we are, to nature, to the body, mind, to the earth and the earth grid, to consciousness, um, to speaking my truth, to knowing what that is, going through all the processes that are necessary that life guides us through to contact the truth of who we are.
Mhm.
Well, and you mentioned, Hillary, this, your relationship to fear, and we've talked about a little bit in previous calls the difference between a transcendence orientation of awakening versus a real embodied one that embraces our humanity and our relationships and all of that. But you've had, with your own history, your first encounters were with, was it with Papaji, and then the awakening through that doorway, and then can you speak a little bit how that was impacted then through your experience with Waking Down and Trillium?
You know, my first experience was with Bhagwan Rajneesh, and I was in a commune for 5, 6 years. Um, and then I had an awakening through this man who had been with Papaji, who was also formerly with Rajneesh. And he came back to Marin and had sittings. And 5 of us would get together every day and sit together. And my consciousness awakening came through working with him, with Deva Prem.
Oh, okay.
And then I had the consciousness awakening and had a lot of bliss for a while. And then my mind started becoming more and more and more intense, like very intense, more than I'd ever experienced it. And I found that I'd been sitting on top of trauma that I never knew was there. And so I tried finding people who could help me deal with this. And my teacher at the time didn't really know how to help me. So I felt like I needed to go to India and be with Papaji. So I did that in 92. And I had more and more blissful openings into my infinite nature. But I still didn't know how to deal with the strong mind states that were coming and all the trauma that it had kicked up. So then I found Saniel and Waking Down and began more of my embodiment journey and was helped by countless other people as well on this journey.
Is that also when you guys met? Was when did Ted? Which one of you met Saniel first, or was it in the same time you guys arrived?
I met Saniel in 94, and then I met Ted. I was a massage therapist at the time, and he came in to have a massage. And well, he can tell you more about that.
That must have been in
That was in
late,
95.
yeah, somewhere in
95.
'95. And then, anyway, I at one point I thought it was an amazing massage, and I kept her card. And then a year later, I needed a massage person, and found her card and went and visited her, and began to fall utterly in love. And that was the beginning of how we got together.
Hmm.
But then she was the one who had met Samuel first and
Yeah.
encouraged me into a sitting with her and with Samuel and others, and started started that work. Started sitting in the back of the room saying nothing for a while, and then they couldn't shut me up. Started being the squeaky wheel, asking all kinds of ridiculous logical questions from my
Uh,
rational mind.
Yeah.
the
Like, tell
atheist
me
way.
why I should feel. Tell me why I should feel. That's one of the questions he had.
Which is very interesting. I'm glad you remembered that because that was it was a serious and significant question. Why should I spend my time feeling? Because I grew up in a family that gave absolutely zero value to emotions. Everybody was repressing and hiding and pretending that they didn't have feelings, which was completely absurd and obviously not working very well. And it got me poorly conditioned in relationships, of course, because if I'm going to spend the rest of my life not feeling anything, why would anybody want to hang out with me?
Mhm.
So, for me, the feeling dimension of this whole thing has just been one of the bigger challenges. And yet, the reason that I was enticed in that direction was not only because Jana gave me some sort of great answer to that question, but mostly because I wanted to be with Hillary. And Hillary's a feeler. And if I couldn't meet her with my feelings, she wouldn't want to be with me and she wouldn't be with me.
Mhm.
So that was a major motivator for me. That's what got me going in that direction.
Well, so both of you guys had quite a bit of experience and exploration spiritually before you got involved with waking, meeting each other.
Yeah.
Um, what what did that environment do for? I mean, and you guys had been in relationships before as well. How did being in that environment support and also challenge your relationship and coming together?
Well, I think all relationships the challenges are innate.
Built into the system.
It's totally
Hmm.
built in, right? All you have to do is get together, especially if you're going to like live in the same place.
Hmm.
And that's just going to bring up all the stuff. It's going to trigger us into all of the wounds and conditioning that was never resolved in the past because no one was meeting us emotionally,
Hmm.
right? And until our feelings are actually being received, there is no healing. That's just part of what's just become utterly obvious over the years.
Well, and
And
then
yeah, go ahead.
similar to what you've said in the past, you talked about myths of enlightenment. There's a lot of myths of relationships as well.
Yes.
Like people, you find a soul partnership, a soulmate, and then everything's good to go. But that's not the case as far as how it works out. At least for me and many people I know.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up. Myths of relationship are rampant. And basically, it's another way of saying we all have the expectations we grew up with. And
And the templates we grew up with.
yeah, same thing. Yeah. And so we expect relationships that when people start having problems with each other, we expect that to be the beginning of the end. At least, at least probably one out of every two people minimum, and maybe more like two out of every three people expect that. When there's a
Hmm.
problem, something's wrong with us, something's wrong with the relationship, it's going to go bad from here. And
Yeah, nobody knows how to work it out. We just haven't been shown that.
right, and it can't be worked out if you're avoiding feelings. It's impossible. You can, work out stuff on the surface about how much we will, clean the dishes and how often, and things that piss each other off around the house. But that's not getting to the core. That's not getting to the root. The root is getting down to the unmet needs and the unhealed issues, the ways in which we've never been felt or accompanied
Or listened too deeply.
or gotten.
Our reality
Yeah.
was not gotten. And so we don't know what it's like to have our reality gotten. We don't know what it feels like.
And furthermore, we're expecting our reality to never be gotten by anybody.
Hmm. You know, that reminds me, I was talking with my dear friend Nancy the other day, and she has worked with you guys. I think it's okay to share this here on the call. She used this phrase, working with you guys really helped her feel the intolerable in relationship. Um, and
Mm.
phrase, I think, it really says a lot as far as where people get to in relationships where they just feel so stuck in those, like, the place they're so afraid to go towards, and the relationship is kind of drawing them in, and how to be with that or navigate through that. Uh,
Yeah.
can you guys say a little bit, like, what your experience of that was in your relationship, to some degree, what you feel comfortable sharing, and then also how you help other people be with those places?
Yeah, well, let me just start off by saying that feeling of intolerability in relationship is the same feeling of intolerability that we have within ourselves when we can't face anything. So it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just that in relationship, we think it means we have to leave it, that it's not working, And well, and with ourselves, we can also escape and avoid.
hmm And by the way, I just want to say that it's not like we believe all relationships can or should work out, because we're not compatible with everybody. So there's always that as an additional factor. But the real problem is, once you find somebody you're compatible with, then how do you heal the stuff and work with all the arguments and triggers and problems, that challenges that come up, in a way that actually keeps the relationship close? How do we stay intimate while feeling uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, just I remember early on in our relationship, I always had the pattern of being very reactive because that's the kind of family I grew up in. And I remember when we'd get into arguments, I would just like want to leave the room, just have to leave the room. Couldn't make myself stay. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. And I would work with this in myself. And I remember one day feeling like, okay, here it is again. I'm in very reactive, and I don't care if I have to die right now. I am not leaving the room. I'm going to force myself to sit here and stay here. And I did. And it took a lot to be willing to face that because, like you say, the intolerability keeps coming up. The feeling like I won't survive this. And even though it sounds kind of silly, it is our truth in the moment. That's why we keep jumping out of the pain. And so I was able to stay, and it changed everything for me. The willingness and the courage to face into what I had been previously running away from.
And I just want to add that the depth to which Hillary did that work, not just once, but for a long time, taking complete responsibility for her own emotional reality. I find that rare. It's really unusual, and I think Hillary has sort of paved the way and is able to show that, you know what, even these feelings that we are utterly convinced because of our childhood conditioning are going to kill us, or it's part of a crisis that we have to find some way out of. It doesn't actually, that's just the conditioning. And when you become awake enough in consciousness to be able to see these patterns in the moment, now we're talking about why it's so important to include consciousness in the whole awakening and healing process. Because when consciousness is not awake, you don't notice this stuff. You're just in it. Your face is in it. You're part of the pattern. You're enacting it without really being that aware until later. Oh, right, I did something that was not so good to my partner, or I was angry in a way that was judgmental or bad, or projecting my stuff, whatever. But the more we awaken in consciousness, the more it's obvious. The less we can just miss these details of how much our conditioning is causes a tremendous amount of pain in our relationships in the present.
And awakening in consciousness teaches us how to hold ourselves more and more and more deeply. So you need both.
Mhm. And the ways on both ends for individuals to awaken, and also for their relationship to awaken. What are some ways that you help people do that?
Well, first of all, we start by helping the couples understand their Enneagram types, because until you understand your own type and how you're different from others, not just through the Enneagram, it also helps to use other systems too.
Human design.
Yeah, human design is great. It's incredibly helpful to understand. One of the things I started getting from the Enneagram, the goodness of all the differences that people show up with. What's great about that? But when you get into human design, it's incredibly specific and really interesting. There's all kinds of traits and characteristics that show up in the chart that are like, normally you might think, no one should be like that, especially spiritually advanced people shouldn't be like that. They shouldn't like have this gift for manipulating people in order to help the community or something like that. But human design has all these areas where it's like, nope, that's just how people are. They're supposed to be like that. And so the more you get into these systems, the more you really start feeling and experiencing everybody. We weren't just giving lip service to like everybody's perfect the way they are. Everybody is perfect the way they are. They're also conditioned. And yes, we're here to help people work out and heal the conditioning. But we're still perfect just the way we are. It's all remarkable what happens when we start honoring the truth of what's right about us. And so when we're working with couples, that's one of the places we start. We help them understand each other's unique perspectives. We start sort of playing translator in front of each other. One person will talk and then one of us will jump in and say, oh, hey, partner, that to you, that might sound like this, but here's what they mean. So we do a lot of that translating kind of stuff. And after a little while, they start getting, oh, I was completely misunderstanding this, my partner here. I didn't understand what they were pissed about. I didn't understand what their reality was. And I can see that I got triggered in my stuff, which made it hard for me to listen to them or something like that. So we have this way of kind of holding the relationship with a no-fault disposition. And we say this very specifically to the couples. We say, we encourage you to start with a no-fault disposition and start with as much of a forgiving attitude as you can about the past, because we have all been deeply, deeply conditioned. It's very hard to understand how deeply we've been conditioned. And we've all been doing our best, and our best is still very painful for ourselves and each other. And let's just accept that. So when we start setting up that kind of a space, everybody kind of calms down and they start listening and they start becoming curious and interested in the other person's different reality and what's good about it and how am I not getting it and how do I get triggered when they say this? And then we start getting into the past, the details of, okay, what was your conditioning? What happened in childhood? What happened when there was an argument in the house? How did people cope with it?
And it's so helpful for their partner to hear this kind of stuff about their past, about their patterning, because it'll open their hearts. They'll have much more compassion for their partner. And we teach couples how to deeply listen to each other, because that's why we fight. That's why we argue. That's why we get into reactivity, is because we can't listen deeply.
We get triggered.
We get triggered.
We get triggered. It stops us from listening, and it starts making us want to speak about our own reality. If you bring me a complaint about my behavior, what I used to do is get defensive, point out her behavior flaws, or give reasons and excuses why I had to do what I did. It was all a big defense, right? And why would I need to defend? Because nobody ever hung out with me in my reality, right? So I'm basically protecting my heart from feeling any more hurt than necessary. And as long as I believe that protecting my heart from feeling hurt is going to get me anything I want, well, that's difficult, right? That's kind of pre-rot in the language of Waking Down in Trillium. Haven't really rotted yet if you're not interested in experiencing your own pain or discomfort.
Explain what the rot means.
Yeah, what Samuel really described the rot as is a sort of whole being existential decay out of our compensation patterns, out of our belief in our own conditioning,
out of trying to change ourselves,
and out of idealism, right? So in a way, it's a decay out of a mind-based way of doing our lives that is directing us in a way to reduce emotions and feelings. And so when we start rotting out of those patterns, you start feeling those feelings that you were trying to cover up. And if you have a negative orientation toward that, that's going to be a problem. You won't really, the rot won't go to completion. But if you have a positive orientation toward those feelings and you understand and you're being supported to like feel that material and integrate that into your awareness, then not only you stop running from yourself, but you also stop running from pain in relationship.
Mm. So I'm hearing a couple of different things here as far as what you guys are doing in working with individuals, both helping them go through their own interior development around consciousness awakening and how that relates to their, shadow material or conditioning, and then also how that's playing out in the relationship. It sounds like there's two different kind of vectors of stages: the stages of the individual's growth, and then the actual relationship, what it's ready for, we're ready to attend to, or work through. Would you say there's pretty universal movements for both the individual relationship that you guys are noticing?
God. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. People are constantly evolving and relationships are constantly evolving. And there are common markers in those evolutionary flows that we can understand and see as average, um, experiences. So we we can share with you a model that we put together to help couples understand the relationship journey. And then, what the heck, while we're going through that, we can talk about what's happening individually with people. So,
Yeah, that,
sound good?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So first we have when the relationship begins, there's the honeymoon phase. And everybody knows what that's like. It's like, oh, we're falling in love. Everything is so great. We're so similar. Oh, you like drinking water. I like drinking water too. So we can really bond on that. And so they just keep, in the honeymoon phase, there's generally a lot of that going on, finding the similarities and avoiding the differences. And then, but obviously, there's a limit to how long that's going to go on. Sooner or later, the differences start popping up, and we start feeling the discomfort of those differences. And we start getting triggered, thinking there's something wrong if we're not both on the same wavelength about everything. Which, of course, just saying it here sounds silly, but when you're in that place, that's actually how it is.
Yeah, and you start to get nervous when that feeling of, oh my God, I'm so in love, starts to dissipate. You think there's something really wrong, but
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong. That this is how it goes.
Yeah. And part of that is that when we first start falling in love, it reminds us of being loved by our parents when we were really little. If we did get that, we will be reminded of that and the bliss of that and how wonderful it is and how much we miss that and how much we need it and how much we can't afford not to have it, which is one of the reasons that as soon as we start having some discord, we get freaked out. We start backpedaling and defending and attacking and going into all of these reactions, thinking something is horribly wrong. And, that's the world we grew up in, right? That things have changed a lot since then.
So we really work with couples to help them see that nothing is wrong. It's just a feeling. There's a feeling of, as you mentioned before, intolerability, wanting to run, uh, all of those really difficult, challenging feelings. That it's just a feeling. And you can actually just feel it and sit there and be in it. And it does pass, but that there's nothing wrong. There's nothing to run away from.
So the
I just
ways
want to,
that I was just going to check in as far as the ways that you guys help people feel more comfortable with those really uncomfortable feelings.
Mhm.
By the way, just the way you guys are holding them, the way that they're feeling understood and empathized with, to be with whatever's coming up. Like, is that what you find what happens in the sessions, or how do you notice that change for people being to want to get away from them versus actually feeling more safety to actually be with them?
I think when, we hold people in relationship the same way we hold people when we're working individually with clients. Um, we hold them with great care and honor for their unique reality.
And respect.
Yeah, and great respect. So we take time to get to know them. We feel into things that they say and ask a lot of clarifying questions. We give them validation where we see that they are strong and, really trying and doing their best. And we basically respond to them the way a caring parent would respond if the parent were awake enough to notice how much they're needed and how much their love needs to be present with the child. So we do this, the more we do that sort of thing with the couples, the more both parties feel like, oh, they're not going to just judge us and blame us and decide who's right and decide who's wrong and like make one person feel bad or make us both like feel like we have to be constantly working to do better all the time. No.
And we draw out their partner so that they can also hold that person, and that person sees that their partner is on board with them and maybe is more open to them than they've ever been, more vulnerable, more loving. And
Mhm.
that is a healing balm right there.
And
That
it sounds
draws.
so setting some new set points in the relationship where those things are welcome within oneself and with each other in the relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Normalizing freaky, uncomfortable things that we would usually run from, when we notice them starting to arise in a session with couples, we'll just kind of magnetize toward that and give all kinds of warm, green lighting, accepting space for the person to own what's coming up for them. And to sometimes we need to say things like, "Look, we can feel you've got some anger coming up, and we just want to make room for that." So we might turn to the partner and say, "This is, don't take this personally. This is just how your partner is feeling this right now. So see if you can just stay present and just listen. When don't turn it into a problem." So they're kind of getting ahead of it helps them like, okay, they can follow the instruction. And then when they start listening, they start having the direct experience of what happens when you really openly listen to your partner without taking it personally and you just get their reality. What happens is they feel gotten, they feel received, they feel heard, they feel understood, and they heal. And it's not just the healing in the moment, it's the healing all the way back to age 3 or whatever the heck, all this, where it's all coming from.
And sometimes people who are spiritual mistake being a spiritual person for not feeling their feelings and not communicating their feelings, and maybe feeling like feelings don't really matter, and if I'm really awake I
Mm-hmm.
should be able to transcend them. We've come up against that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. There's
Yes,
that split between the human and the divine aspects of having to hang out in one or the other kind of thing.
Right, right.
So,
exactly.
what you guys, I mean, what I was just hearing from what you're sharing about what happens in sessions, there's a reparative, a reparenting that happens, both that you guys are offering the individuals as well as the other partner is repairing in some ways in the partnership, how they're showing up in new ways, and the individual for themselves is reparenting themselves in new ways by willing to stay in the discomfort and
Yeah,
curiosity.
Yeah.
that's right. So we're reparenting ourselves and helping each other, reparenting each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of, there's this moment early in our relationship where we were standing in the kitchen and something happened between us, and I don't remember what it was. And she looked at me, she paused and looked at me and said, You need a mother. I'm not going to be your mother. No way. I'm not going to be your mother. And I flashed back to like a long series of previous relationships where I heard this in the past. And I thought to myself, I've seen this pattern. And so this time I said, actually, I need you to be my mother because my mother didn't give me what I needed. And if I'm going to be healed, I need some help. I need you to give me some maternal energy. And, at first she was like, what? And then, I made my case enough and she's like, okay, I'll try. I'll give you that. I'll do what I can. And just her willingness to do that, just her willingness to say that and to try that made me feel way safer. So I was able to be more vulnerable. So the more vulnerable I got, the more, she was willing to automatically bring out her maternal side. Um, so there's this kind of, you can go into these vortexes that go down between two people where you're like disrespecting each other or not listening or not getting it, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. Or you can go the other direction, which is what we teach people to do. Learning how to listen, speak your needs, say what you really want, say what is broken about you, be vulnerable, be honest, be direct, all this kind of stuff. Have good communication skills, which we teach. But when you're going in that direction, there are all of a sudden the world opens up a huge number of opportunities for ways that we can be supportive to each other. That we can start, instead of thinking, how do I communicate with my partner to get what I need? And it's more like, how do we be together in ways that help us both be fully who we are? How can we both be fully human and fully divine
And
and
support each other in the
support each other? Yeah.
process. And
Well, yeah, go ahead, Hillary.
no, of course, that comes, with
With
time.
time. Yeah.
Well, as far as helping people become vulnerable, I mean, a lot of times people don't even know what they need because they're conditioning and the cycles they're in. Um, can you say a little bit more about how you help individuals find what they need if they struggle with that?
Yeah, I'm also realizing we sort of got off track from the journey, the couple's journey. So what should we do? Should we go back and get on that, and then I
Or
think,
talk about the
or you want to just talk
vulnerability.
about the vulnerability
Ability,
now?
and then link that and go forward with the stages.
Okay. Okay. Well,
I think people will be vulnerable if they feel safe and if they
yeah,
feel like you're really listening and getting their reality and that you don't have an agenda
and you're not going to make them
for
wrong.
them. Yeah, and you're not going to make them wrong. I think a natural vulnerability will come up. And,
Mhm.
for some people, this is anger. They've never been able to really feel and show their anger before.
Mhm.
And so they come out with anger, and their partner can feel like, well, that is not vulnerable. But it actually is.
It
Mhm.
certainly
It's
can be.
starting to open up.
Hmm. Yeah. Also, we're all just, I mean, the way I found myself putting it, the more we do this couple work, the more a huge billboard keeps coming up for me, which will eventually be the title of a book. But it's fear of feeling. The entire world is in fear of feeling. There's all kinds of good reasons and evolutionary realities about why it's that way, but it is very much that way. This is the generation that raised us. And so being vulnerable, like who got a lot of good templates or modeling around being vulnerable? Not very many people.
Not very many, no.
Yeah,
So people need to be educated about that because they just don't know.
they need to be shown. This
Yeah.
is what it looks like to be vulnerable. Say this, say that. Don't defend. Don't even push your energy at the other person. Just say what's true for you. Stand in that and know that that's going to be the fastest way for you to have your partner engage with you and give you what you really want. Not
Yeah.
by not by stabbing them, but
No.
by standing there and
Stabbing
speaking your truth and owning it.
doesn't usually work out well. At least
Yeah.
that's what I thought. But in your story with Hillary too, that willingness there to take the risk, just to actually say, I really need this, or would you please, try giving this to me? Like, try and fail is sometimes forward together, trying things,
Mhm.
um, and risking. I think that really comes along with it. There's no perfect such thing as perfect vulnerability, so it's sometimes can
Yeah.
be finding the way forward.
Right. And that's why we feel like commitment is so important because it 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 makes a container for the couple to actually go through it together. And if there's a commitment to each other, it makes it much easier to grow, to open, to be vulnerable.
Right. Because if there's no commitment, then there's this constant fear. If I don't say things you like, if I don't give you what you want to hear,
You
you're going to
can
reject
leave.
me. You're going to leave
They're
me.
out of there, yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, if you've got a weak container, it's very hard to go deep. It's impossible, really. You can only go as deep as the strength of the commitment in the container. because it's going to take time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff, is we've been living with this stuff usually for decades, and for many of us, decades and decades and decades. And it doesn't just turn around right away. No matter how enlightened you are and no matter how great the education, it's going to take its organic time to work through.
Because as Sandra Glickman once said, all wounds are incurred in relationship. And so all wounds need to be healed in relationship. So for people who are, spend their lifetimes alone, there's a lot of conditioning they probably won't get to.
Well,
Mhm.
so we talk about the stages of relationship, I guess being not in committed relationship, that would be towards the front end of the progression,
Yes.
kind of
Yes.
explore. I mean, I see.
Non-committal relationship would be number 0 in the list.
Yeah. Well, and it
And
seems like, as teenagers, there's lots of there's an exploration phase as human beings go through and are, exploring different types of relationships, dating multiple people or a
Yeah.
variety of different forms of that, just experimenting and exploring. I think there's a
yeah,
stage for that in our experience.
absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we all have to go through
Yeah,
that for sure.
and I didn't mean to imply that everybody should be in a committed relationship,
Hmm.
but just even those who are not, just relationship in general. Like that's where we get to work out our conditioning and our wounding.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I.
Hmm. Another way to say this is if the ways that we are conditioned to act out our relationship patterns and conditioning, if the way that we do that is hurting other people, and we insist on no limits to that, well, who would want to be with that? I mean, people who themselves were conditioned that way will end up getting caught in those kinds of relationships. But sooner or later, if you got two people who are trying to move deeper into awakening and honesty and vulnerability, if one person is hurting the other person with their behavior, the other person's going to have to put their foot down, and set a limit and say, this does not work for me. I can't have this relationship if you keep doing this to me, whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
And if the relationship container isn't solid, um, the person is likely to leave and say, "Screw you! I don't have to change for you or for anybody. I'm out of here." Fine. As long as you really believe or feel that leaving the relationship is better than working it out, you'll keep doing that, right? It's kind of like pre-wrought, oops, coming up against discomfort, let me go do something else fun.
Hmm.
Or, when you get to the place in your own process where it's like, oh, there's discomfort here, I want to see what's in this for me. Well, then when you're in that place in relationship, then instead of running out the door when there's a problem or hiding out or getting busy or doing whatever to distract, then you're turning toward it and you're saying, okay, this is really uncomfortable. I don't know how to deal with this right now, but I'm feeling, angry or sad or depressed or unheard or whatever. And then you start working it out.
Can you name a little bit how that's the stages of relationship then relate to once they get to that point where the person's willingness inside themselves to start to be with those uncomfortable
Hmm.
places, where
Hmm.
that form like both partners are like, okay, all right, we're not leaving. We're willing to start to be with the discomfort that comes up in us instead of just blaming the other, like or ducking out. Like, what's where do you go from there?
Hmm. Well, okay, so the first stage was the honeymoon phase, and then that starts getting disrupted when people start getting pissed off. And then the second phase is emotionally reactive relating. So this is the phase where you're triggering each other a fair amount and you're avoiding it or you're trying to work on it, but your conditioning is getting in the way. So you just keep triggering each other and it's becoming problematic. This is often the stage at which couples actually find us. They're in crisis and they need help. And we start giving them some education about, okay, here's how we can help, and here's where this goes. Here's where you're coming from, and here's where this goes. And when people have a map like that, it really helps them. It's like, oh, I can see myself in that map. The map makes sense. Therefore, I can have some patience and move in that direction. I don't have to have it go perfectly right now. So, yeah. So then, two is emotionally reactive relating, and avoiding feedback is a big part of that. It's like, I don't need your feedback because we're all so used to getting negative feedback that we just don't want it.
So there's not the willingness at that point to hear the other's impact. What
Right.
our conditionings playing out impact on the other person. We're not open to hearing that.
Right. That's right. And
Yeah.
then we go through the next
And
stage.
also, I think we're not open to hearing that because so often the other person has not just stayed on their own side of the fence when relaying their feelings and emotions. They project it out
Yeah.
onto you, and you're used to having that projection. But if somebody actually just stands in themselves and just says, I'm angry, it's not projected onto the other one and they don't have to take it personally. So
Hmm.
that really starts to shift things.
Hmm.
So
So
when people can feel the other person isn't always going over to the other to make it about them, but they're actually starting to claim their own experience, there's a new safety that emerges.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
it's a lot like what happens when somebody's throwing grenades and then they stop. It feels way safer to be closer to them.
Hmm. the, I'm thinking of it in that metaphor. Literally, it's like, oh wow, there's not explosions anymore. Whoa,
Yeah,
this is a different kind of
exactly.
relationship.
I mean, I have to admit that when Hillary really started that work quite spontaneously of I'm just going to sit here and feel it and I don't care what it does, I it's like the my fear went from way high to way lower. I
Mm,
felt way safer. And I was just in awe of what she was doing because I wasn't at that ability. I didn't have the ability then. She was really modeling it for me at that
mm,
point.
mm,
But we're almost at this through the next phase where it starts lining up with the rot. So stage three, we call striving for harmony. So it's like, okay, you've gone through the reactive relating phase, and now we just really want to be in harmony with each other. We want it to be positive. We want it to be loving. Let's try it. Let's try making it better. So then you go through all kinds of negotiated agreements. When I say this, you do that. When you say this, I'll say that. Let's not do this, and let's always talk about this or that when this happens. So you go through this, okay, we're going to try and make this work as best we can through mind-based ideas and agreements. And there's all kinds of, people who teach ways to keep relationship happy and healthy and safe through proper language and all of that. Um, but there's a limit to that because after you've been through that for a while, you start feeling like I don't want to have to like conform myself to all of these rules. I want to
Right.
just feel what I feel and say what I
Right.
say.
You lose your feeling of being an authentic human being.
yeah, yeah.
So that's when it's like, okay, I have tried everything, every which possible way, and now it's time to start rotting. And, the rotting is when you start valuing your truth and your partner's truth over even harmonious feelings, right? If you suddenly, it's like we've done everything we could to promote harmonious feelings. And that didn't get us everywhere we wanted to get. That was also kind of forced. How do we get to be authentic? And what happens when we don't have harmonious feelings? So now we're getting into the rot in the relationship. And when we can help couples understand that they're coming to that place, it's so much better because when you're sort of decaying out of the patterns and falling into the uncomfortable stuff that is causing these problems in the first place, the tendency is to take each other's stuff personally. And yeah, so, couples need help there. They need to be reminded, and they need to remind themselves and remind each other, and we remind them this is just part of the healing process. This is temporary. You will feel these difficult things, and you will learn to express them in ways that are just speaking your truth, and your partner will learn to take you in and validate your truth. And then so more and more the couple starts directly having the experience of, wow, we felt really uncomfortable. We both got really triggered, but we leaned into it. We followed Ted and Hillary's empathic listening protocol, which we can talk about. And we really listened to each other and we really got each other. And we came out of this feeling way closer. Every single time that happens, it goes against the past conditioning. The past conditioning is when you get into this stuff, it's just going to go downhill from here. And but when you start having the opposite of experience, it's like, oh my God, if we actually lean in this way and really find a way to speak our truth and hear each other, it brings us closer every single time. And not only brings us closer, it heals something very deep and ancient in our soul.
So there's this capacity you're helping individuals develop of being able to validate the other in the differences, in the discomfort.
Yeah.
How, that's what I'm hearing, at least. What
Yeah.
what's what how do you help them do that? I mean, is it just they see you guys, how tuned in you are with them and the questions you ask and I mean, you mentioned this empathic listening protocol. Can you speak a little bit more to that and how that?
Yeah. I'm going to put that
Well,
up.
one thing that's necessary is that partner A, uh, oh, I just lost my train of thought.
Let me just give the top headers on the empathic listening protocol. It's too much to go into here, but if your listeners would like to send us an email, we'll send them the protocol. But just on the top level, first is listen to yourself, because a lot of time what happens between couples is we get upset, we get triggered, some uncomfortable feeling comes up. And part of the conditioning is we go to our partner and we try to feel better by dumping it on them.
Mm.
And obviously that doesn't work very well.
Right.
So number one on our list is listen to yourself first, which includes, what am I feeling? What's going on here? Am I willing to feel this? If I ain't willing to feel this, I don't think it's very fair to ask my partner to be willing to feel this.
Hmm. Hmm.
So we start by lean into your own reality about what you're feeling. And then if after doing that for a little while, you're like, yeah, now I feel it. And now I still really want to talk with my partner. Sometimes you might come out of that going, don't need to talk with them. I actually resolved something just really getting myself here. But if you want to bring it to your partner, then and this is a huge, huge, huge piece, you don't just bring it to them like, I got an issue with you that I want to work out in mutuality or whatever. You come to them and you say, I'm triggered and I'm having something I'd really love for you to hear me out on. Would you be willing to listen to me?
So it's that
You know,
ask permission kind of
ask
thing.
permission,
Yeah.
invite, right?
Yeah,
Invite your
and
partner.
before we even get to that place where we ask permission, we have to get what we're feeling. So often people would never even consider saying things out loud, uh, like that I have this need or I have that need. It's like we don't know what's really going on. We don't know what the needs are. We don't know what to speak or say. So I just want to make space for that because it's a whole exploration of starting to become in touch with what's actually going on in me because I've never actually given this much space before. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so making the room first to be even in touch or aware of what's going on inside,
Yeah,
taking
even
trigger.
if it's confusion. It's like sometimes people will just be confused or spaced out or whatever, and they don't really understand that that's the thing to communicate.
Mhm.
Like, I am really confused right now. I don't even have words to describe what I'm feeling. I don't even know what I'm feeling. But you start with where you are. And even that, if you do it in relationship, it starts things moving in you. It's really progress.
Mhm. That also makes me think of how much in our culture right now people use the word trigger, but they orient that to meaning that it's the other person's responsibility to deal with it because they triggered
Right.
up versus taking the
Right.
space to really be with what's being triggered, and then when they've been with that sufficiently enough to go to the other, and if there's safety established in the relationship to some degree, depending on the kind of relationship, to be able to ask, with permission, saying, would you be willing to just hear me out here? That's a
Yeah.
different move than what is the norm in our culture around triggering.
Exactly.
Exactly. The conditioning is basically fear of feelings. So, if I'm feeling something uncomfortable, I'm going to try and push it away. I'm going to push it onto you. I'm going to push it away from myself, or I'll distract myself. But when we start doing what I call taking emotional responsibility, which means you're turning toward your own uncomfortable emotions and staying present and starting to speak the truth of what that is.
And excuse
Yeah.
me, that could be saying something like, I am super triggered right now. I don't know what to do. Just speaking that. It's like we
Hmm.
don't have to know what we feel because sometimes it's not given to us in the moment,
Hmm.
but we have to start communicating where we're at. And
Yeah,
that's what has been
it
kind
is.
of a very unknown terrain, you know? So we really help people to connect with what's actually going on,
Mhm.
you know?
And there's a, a developmental sequence for individuals first to feel comfortable to do that with themselves and to feel safe enough with another person and to be that honest and with what's going on,
Yeah.
which
Yep.
it
Yeah.
seems like what you guys help develop in working with individuals. And this is when I work with people similarly, there's that space you're creating for people to feel held. And over time, then there's more room for that feeling of safety inside themselves and with their partner to be with what they're actually experiencing, even if they don't know what they're experiencing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of what's going on in these sessions is we are basically functioning as new templates for the clients. We're showing them how to actually be present and to say what's true in a way that isn't threatening or distracting from the emotional realities that want to be worked out. So
So
that's, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, so now at this point, as far as the development through the stages, you said we're at the point of the raw, being more comfortable with those uncomfortable places, being able to hear more empathically. Is there a couple of pieces to the empathic listening protocol?
Yeah. So once you've invited your partner and they have agreed, see, so basically you invite your partner, are you open to talking about this now? They might say, I'm open to talking about it, but not now. I've got something for 15 minutes. Fine. Can we do it in 15 minutes? Okay. Yeah. So you have a date. The time comes for the date. The partner who has something to share, first of all, the partner who has something to share starts by again touching in with their feelings. So they're connecting with what they're actually feeling. And they set the context. Okay, when this happened, I felt that. Or when you did this, I felt this. So just saying kind of the facts. And then they go into I statements about their feelings. Right? Here's what I started feeling. I felt this, I felt unheard, I felt pushed, I felt disregarded. And while they're doing this, we have specific instructions for the other partner, the one who is holding and listening. That person, no interruptions. Open your heart. In other words, really be willing to let yourself feel what they're feeling because that's where all the healing is. If you're really just into defending yourself, better to have waited longer before you had this conversation.
Hmm.
When the partner invited you, you could say, "It's going to take me at least an hour to settle down. Let's do it in an hour."
Well,
Fine,
I
good
think
idea.
making that comment too about that sometimes when you go to the person and ask, they may not be in a space where they're ready. And so that transition from it's not a demand, it's a request. And
Right.
in that moment might not be the best moment. And having flexibility as the one that's asking for another moment to be a better situation for you both to explore that together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important. It's really the only way it's going to work because if you just like impose your need to be heard on the other person right in that moment. If they're not ready, it's just going to make it worse. Yeah,
Hmm.
it always makes it worse. So it's important that we honor each other's timings and needs.
Yeah, well, one of the things that's really been big for me in relationship with, and my wife will probably laugh at this, but I've had so much expectation at times, for my needs to be heard or received, and it would come across as a demand at times versus a willingness to explore how that I might be projecting those needs out onto her in the relationship to meet them instead of take care of them inside myself.
Right, right.
But it's also true that we do have this need to be cared for by others. So it is it's like yes, we have to be able to take responsibility and stay present with our own emotions in order for us to even be able to metabolize love coming from the outside. But it's also a paradox. We have to be able to see love coming from the outside in a sane and stable way
Hmm.
for us to then learn how to metabolize love.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
Right.
we need it from the outside and we need it from the inside.
Mm.
People will find their own way about this, but there's always both.
Yeah.
Was there more you wanted to say about the empathic listening protocol?
Yeah. Um, so so a person is now sharing and the other person is like, okay, not interrupting, they're just staying there present. Part of what will happen for them is like, oh, that's how you feel. What about what I felt? They'll go into their own story in their own mind. And so we just say, look, this will happen for you. Just put all that stuff aside.
You'll get your
You'll get
turn.
your turn.
Hmm.
And so that's part of the instruction. And to the person who is speaking, just not only speak your truth, but own your own story about what's going on your partner on the partner's side. Like, I'm really pissed off, and I'm imagining that you're doing this to hurt me because you hate your mom or whatever the thing is, right? And so that's very vulnerable. We're no longer accusing them of all kinds of crimes, which is a very deeply ingrained pattern, right? As soon as somebody's pushing some negative energy at us, we have a tendency to turn around and push it back and start accusing each other of crimes of intent.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I had that big time. Yeah.
So it takes consciousness and mutual support to like start noticing, okay, here's what I'm feeling and here's my story about it. Here's my story about why you brought this to me or why you did that thing and why you hate me and don't care, which it's almost never true. But it's really amazing when you start getting to this level. Um, so then the other partner is who's listening to this. They basically start, when the time is right, they start reflecting back what they heard. Okay, so I heard you say that when I did this, you felt that. Okay, I got that. Um, I got why you would feel that, and I got that my actions caused you to feel that. Okay, yeah, and I'm sorry, and I get it, and I can really feel how that would be upsetting for you.
So there
So
needs to be the willingness of the person that's listening to really take what's been said and making them wrong, actually take what they're saying and then reflecting back to them that it has landed, it has registered. And if there is an honest response of like, hey, I'm sorry that hurt you, be able to share as well.
exactly, and it takes an incredible amount of presence and willingness to feel and not jump out of uncomfortable feelings to go through this process. Because, for instance, one of the things that's going to come up, partner, let's say Hillary's telling me something about how she got hurt by something I did. My tendency is to go like, you have no idea what was going on in me. I was this, and this was my experience, and I can't believe you started this, and blah, blah, blah. Very strong in me to go in that kind of direction. And so to just sit there and go, right, those are just my feelings. I'm putting them to the side. I'm here to listen and feel her. It's a radical reorganization. It's a radical reorientation, just like Hillary did that we described earlier. Everybody needs to learn how to do that. And the more you can do that, the more these miracles start happening. You start reflecting, really getting their reality, and their missile defense system comes down, yours comes down, you both start really feeling each other, and you start feeling close again, and things get healed. And then these healing episodes start getting more frequent. The more you practice this stuff, the more frequent this happens,
Yeah.
and the more you have faith that when you lean into the discomfort, it comes out way better and way faster, and it actually works through, and we get closer.
Yeah, and we also remind couples that you're actually on the same side, you're on the same team. And this has huge impact on them because it's like we forget that. We forget that our partner is really on our side. They're not trying to hurt us. Um, and so that softens our hearts too and helps
Mhm.
us be able to hear things and listen more deeply.
The,
Yeah,
the,
for so
the,
long I was aligned. My wife would be telling me, "I'm not your enemy," and my own defenses, my own protections were so clearly I would feel that in relation that it would seem like my partner would be my enemy versus that we're on the same team.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and that stuff is so intensely programmed in that it's completely invisible to most people for a long time. We're not aware of how we have plastered our parents' faces on top of our partner. We're also not aware that we're not supposed to be the same. Like if our partner's not agreeing with us, we're so deeply conditioned to think there's something wrong with them if they don't see it the way I see it.
yeah. This need to be right is a strong one.
Hmm.
We have gone through a lot of that, and the couples that we work with have that as their issue too.
As if there should only be, as if there's such a thing as one right reality between the two people,
Yeah.
which is exactly how most people were conditioned. Yeah, there's a right and a wrong here. It was always the parents were right, the kids were wrong usually. And so we grow up with this essentially anti-mutuality conditioning. It
Hmm.
says we can't both be here at the same time having our own reality. And even though the reality is sometimes uncomfortably different, that doesn't have to be a problem. That's one way of talking about what mutuality is.
Yeah.
Letting the differences be there, honoring them, and not assuming there's a problem because we're not responding the same, or we have very different perspectives, or we just saw the same thing happen and came out with two completely different stories about it. Like, how could you possibly? How is this even possible?
Yeah.
Are you insane? You are insane. You
Yeah.
must be insane.
Hmm.
This kind of stuff is constantly coming up, and that's all about the anti-mutuality conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real gift of what Waking Down Mutuality it carries and Trillium Awakening to as far as this
Yeah,
orientation room for everybody's unique experience to be welcomed versus one has to be above all the others or there is a best way, you know. I
yeah,
really that about all my time involved with Waking Down and Trillium, how much that gave me that sense with other people where it just made more room for curiosity, both about my own experience and others.
Hmm.
yeah. That's right. Then, when you're both being curious about each other's reality, you're present. You're not running out the room.
Hmm.
It builds intimacy very directly. So there's this fifth step in the empathic listening protocol. Once, once partner A has shared and felt, reflected back, and really gotten and heard and all that, and there's this you can just feel it. The hearts just sort of relax and feel closer. Then, whenever the right timing is, sometimes right after that, or other times you have to wait a little time to leave some space. The other partner gets to say what they were feeling through this whole thing,
Mm.
if they want, if they feel like there's something they still need to be heard about.
Mm.
So then you switch places, and they take responsibility for their feelings and they speak it, and the other partner really gets it and reflects it back and is really empathic and is there for them and gets them. And then again, there's this deep connection after that. And then and only then do you start working out the surface issue that prompted this whole thing.
Mm.
The issue like, I can't believe you put all the forks in this bowl in the sink. I told you I hate that.
Mm.
But it wasn't about that.
Mm.
It's not about that stuff, right? So if you're trying to work it out on the surface, it's like, okay, I need you to just never ever ever do this thing again, so I never have to feel that again.
Mm,
That doesn't really work. It doesn't really work out the emotional issue that you had as a child where nobody got you.
mhm. Well, so I'm hearing there's two things in that. One is after the person A has shared, that there's a willingness for person B to wait and see like, hey, is now the time where you've got enough space after all of that's been shared to be able to hear what
Right.
my is, or hey, do you
Exactly.
need more time?
Right.
Willingness to say, okay, I'm fine with waiting until tomorrow to be able to unpack this with you.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
that room versus the pressure, still feeling the pressure that you have to. And maybe the other person's not quite ready yet. Maybe they need to really unpack and then just feel what it was like to unpack all that.
Right.
Um, ready to really receive, in a space to receive the other person. I think that's really
Yeah.
important to highlight there. That
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Thanks for highlighting that, because part of what happens when one person is sharing and the other person is receiving and being empathic and compassionate, um, if you then, as soon as as beautiful and deep as that sharing and that closeness has been through that process, if you turn around and immediately try to go the other direction, the first person can start feeling like something is being taken away from the perspective they just shared and were received in. It's like,
hmm
oh, now it's back to you again.
hmm
There's this part of us that kind of chronically feels like it's always about you, really
hmm
thinking about somebody else in their life when they were young.
hmm
So yeah, sometimes you can do it, sometimes you can't. So essentially, you go back to step two and you do the invitation,
hmm
and then and then you make the time, then that person starts sharing.
hmm
So yeah, there's that little loop that happens, and then when you're both done, then okay, now what was this issue that started this in the first place?
And then
Oh, I
you've
don't care anymore.
right, yeah, I don't
It's
care.
already worked out. Or if you have to work it out, it only takes 1 minute.
hmm hmm And you can
Because it
find.
wasn't the issue itself that was the problem. The problem was that we weren't actually receiving each other
Mhm.
and we weren't owning our own emotions.
Yeah, yeah, a difference between content and context of the relationship and what was going
Mm-hmm.
on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything else to the empathic listening protocol? Is that like that?
No, that's it.
Uh,
There's some details in this, but it's very nicely edited. So, like I said, anybody who wants it, you can just send an email to me, ted@tedstrauss.com, and I'll send it to you. And you can play with it. And please let us know how it's working for you.
yeah, thanks for sharing that. Is there? Can you bring us forward then, as far as at this point in the unfolding stages of relationship, where we're at and what the next step is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, you wouldn't likely be attracted to working with us until you got, well, it's one way or the other. We will try to bring people up to the place where they can begin letting themselves decay out of the avoidance of feelings. And once you get to that place, then practicing the empathic listening protocol starts really working and helping. If they're just like yelling and screaming at each other, we might need to encourage them to actually take some space and chill out, because if nothing else is going to work, okay, that's what we have to do. But
Right,
when one way or the other, when the couple starts understanding that there's a context we're presenting to them that will help hold them and really heal the situation, so then they can start. We could call this the stage four we were talking about, valuing truth over harmonious feelings. That's
hmm
when that's when working with the empathic healing protocol really is significant, when we're ready to feel this uncomfortable stuff and just be present. So then, stage after that is you start both awakening into consciousness, which helps you hold the container of the relationship even more strongly. Because what can hold everything without breaking? The only thing that can do that is consciousness. So the more we are awake in our own consciousness and owning our awakeness in our own consciousness, and our partner is awake in consciousness and they're owning their awakeness, then we're both able to sit and hold space for differences, right? We can be with discomforts even more. We're not just beginning to rot. Now we're more like able to hold more. we're aware of a larger context outside the moment of being uncomfortable. So that's sort of an indication that the relationship is moving in the right direction and is less and less likely to be broken because we're both awake and the awakeness starts being shared. Not only I'm awake in consciousness and you're awake in consciousness, but together there's a field of mutual awakeness that starts building up.
In,
And yeah,
a follow-up question on that for you guys both. Can you describe, since a lot of people have an orientation or a meaning ascribed to what consciousness is, in contrast to that, how in Waking Down and Trillium specifically, it's more of an embodied, it's very physically embodied and in relational space versus a transcendental orientation to consciousness. Can you speak to that as well as what the nature of love is? Is love and consciousness the same, what you're speaking to?
oh wow, yeah. Well, there's different kinds of things we could call love. One of them is universal or unconditional love. And that's part of the human development process. Sooner or later, most people along the way have an experience of unconditional love. They discover that they feel unconditionally loved by the universe, or that they unconditionally have love for all people, no matter how they're showing up. That's different than conditional love, that is also true, right? We are all sort of walking paradoxes. We're both divine and human. And on the human side, we have conditional love and unconditional love. The conditional side is like, I love you forever no matter what, but if you put your fork on the wrong side of the sink, I will hate you. And that's also true, right? Um, so, part of what's going on is we're learning to hold our whole truth, positive and negative, fully unconditionally loving and conditionally loving at the same time.
Yeah, really accepting the human and the infinite as one thing.
Right,
Just
because
knowing
if
that.
we think we're always supposed to act like the way Hallmark movies say love looks, that's just not going to work. It's so not going to
Or
work.
act the way idealistic spiritual teachers
Right,
say enlightenment or awakening
or
looks.
idealistic relationship teachers.
Yeah, all of it.
All of that, all of our ideas about what proper behavior is in relationship, it's just going to go out the door.
Yeah, that's what purifies. That's what releases, are the idealistic notions of how we're supposed to show up on any level.
Yeah. So we had, for instance, one of the big hangups in our relationship was we were at this place, we were at the harmony stage, and then we started really getting into major fights. We were like sick of the harmony. We were ready, we had to go to something deeper and beyond just striving for harmony. So, so then we gave ourselves permission to like have kind of knockdown, drag out fights. Not,
Well,
not,
not
not
really.
really,
That's
not physically.
exaggerated.
We would let ourselves, really voice the frustrations and the angers
Yeah, for
and the
hours.
outrage. Yeah, we'd really get into it and eventually realize that it was a bad idea to keep doing that kind of processing all night with the intent of, well, we'll just get through this and then we'll go to sleep. No, we eventually had to establish a curfew. But we got through that phase, and then we started to learn, okay, we can let ourselves and each other have our real feelings as raw as they need to be. We can also learn how to express that in ways that have some consideration for how that's going to land in our partner. It's not just me, it's us. So there's this shared recognition of usness that I think all couples experience as they go deeper. But then what happens is they hit one of these walls, like, okay, something's wrong here. We're not agreeing on things. We're having arguments. And then they start, the feeling, that beautiful feeling of usness starts evaporating. And then they start getting frantic about it. And then they have fights about the fact that the other person is destroying it or whatever.
Yeah, we have that a lot. I was feeling so loving toward you
And then,
until you did this, Why did you do that to me,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
so So yeah, so we're tying this in with empathic listening. You know, when you finally we started getting to this place where we could learn to start holding space, the awakening of consciousness, which we had both gone through. Yeah, Hillary even did before I did. What year was your consciousness awakening?
92.
92, and mine was in like 97 or 6. But we both shared that, and we both shared the strong desire to figure out how to work out these problems that our parents' generation didn't figure out. And they either divorced or they lived in a détente, mutual agreements of what we're not talking about, where we're not going.
Kind
And
of
we didn't. What
there.
was that?
Kind of like coexisting in some domains of the relationship.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And that wasn't going to be good enough for us, so we had to keep moving. And so that's when we started sort of developing our empathic listening protocol, just by trying stuff and seeing what was working.
Mhm.
And yeah, we're not the only people who were out there doing things like that, but we had our own sort of take on it that for us was ways of helping us to go deeper with each other.
Hmm.
So stage 5 was learning to hold space for differences, ups and downs and differences. Instead of like, you made me feel something I didn't want to feel and I hate you, it's more like, oh, you brought up something that I don't want to feel, and what's that say about me? What do I get from contemplating my own
But
patterns?
the other thing I just want to interject here is that, if one person says, wow, you brought this up and it made me feel like this, it's like at that point, you can ask your partner, can you just hold me while I just feel this?
Mm-hmm.
And these ways of just bringing our partner into our process are very powerful.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, there's the vulnerability. There's a call for closeness. There's a willingness to risk trusting your partner will respond. There's
Mm-hmm.
that adds to the glue, can be the gluing function of the relationship when there's that willingness on both sides,
Yeah.
um, and to be tender with one another like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the more awake in consciousness and in all domains the both members are, the easier it is to hold yourself and hold each other and tenderly and carefully and patiently and stay present. And the use of the empathic listening protocol is just absolutely crucial. And sometimes we just find ourselves saying, look, this is the work, you guys are at this place, just keep doing this. And every time they come to us and we get on a Zoom session, we're like, okay, let's all do this together. Because if they're having trouble, then okay, we're going to practice empathic listening, and we encourage them to do it in our presence, and we guide them, and we give them guardrails, and we let them know when somebody's jumping over the fence. We just jump right in. It's like, okay, that right there, that was over the line. That's you pushing your energy at them. And
Hmm.
it's, then they start getting it. Oh, right. I was actually pushing my energy at them. I didn't even know I was doing that. We're doing these things. They're so deeply conditioned. We honestly don't even know what we're doing. And
Hmm.
one of the reasons we don't know what we're doing is because we're so defended against feedback, because we're so used to that being uh, not compassionate. I could go into that. That's
Critical. Yeah.
critical. Yeah. Harsh and critical. So if we're not allowing feedback in, then we don't know how we're impacting other people. That's it. We just cut off the communication coming back to us.
And that's why it's important, I'm just going to slow it down a little here and say that if your partner is giving you feedback and you're starting to get really triggered, just share it. Wow, I am really shutting down right now. I am not used to being able to take this kind of stuff in. I feel like the axe is going to fall on me. It's like just keep communicating all along the way. Like your
Mm-hmm.
reality is so valid here.
Yeah, that slowing down is such a valuable practice,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
the wheels can start turning, and then boom, both the train is gone out of the station for both people. Two different trains, two different
Yeah,
directions.
that's
right,
right.
right.
Yeah, and I think part of one of the flags we've discovered along the way of, oh, let's notice that something is happening, is that feeling of urgency.
Hmm.
Yes.
We got to
Hmm.
work this out right this very second. Why? Well, the reason is because we're feeling something uncomfortable, and our conditioning says it'll obliterate me if I just sit here and feel that.
Right. And we can feel that on our own, not in partnership too. Just that
Yeah.
feeling of urgency is usually never our deepest truth.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's usually our reaction that's driving that feeling of urgency. So
Right.
yeah, to slow it down,
Slow it down
really
and say things
important.
like, you might say, I'm feeling kind of frantic. I'm feeling kind of freaked out. I'm feeling an urgent desire to get out of here, whatever. And this is the kind of stuff that uh, it's really a breakthrough when you can get to it and you can realize I can just start saying how I actually feel.
Yeah, and that took me a long time to be able to validate myself that what I had to say was valuable, that what I was feeling was valuable. Because I thought what everybody else was feeling and saying was valuable, but I didn't know that that was true for me as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
There's I just want to add there's a really interesting piece in here when the couples are at this stage where they're starting to learn to speak their truth. One of the detours that can come up, let's say somebody's going into their stuff and saying, I'm feeling really triggered, I'm feeling unheard, I feel like I never get felt and nobody ever gets me. And the other partner, they're just speaking their truth, right? That's how they've been feeling essentially since they were 3 or whatever. And their partner could go, um, I'm not making you feel unheard. I've been listening to you this whole time. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
This is like a standard thing that often happens. And so then we help them go, no, don't take it personally. Just they're actually saying how they're feeling, and your job is to really get it.
And
Because when
it's
you listen to the person say, nobody ever gets me, nobody ever feels me, it's like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I want to be here for you. That's a completely different response, right?
but you have to be willing to hold yourself, even though every fiber of you feels like, but all I've been doing is listening to them. How could they possibly not get me?
Mhm.
You have to hold yourself and know,
You'll have your turn.
no, not just that you'll have your turn, that that's their reality. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean you're a bad or wrong or that you weren't listening and that you didn't get them. It just means that they didn't feel that.
Right. That's right. So, I mean, it brings up this whole interesting thing that well, we could call it breaking the mirror. It's like um, we're so used to um, not being gotten and feeling like when we put out our truth, it is completely misunderstood. And I'm kind of losing the train of thought here. There was something I was trying to get to. But the crucial piece in these misunderstandings is always this subjective taking responsibility. It's like the noticing. This is, I'm being right. You've got your stuff and you're giving me your stuff, but my reaction to your stuff is my stuff.
Mhm.
That's what I was trying to get at. And
Mhm.
these things get so enmeshed, especially when you're mutually triggering each other. It gets all messed up, and then you got to pull apart and come back together slowly.
Mhm.
But when you get that your reaction to your partner's stuff is your stuff, that it's like, oh, okay, I that's my stuff. I'll just sit here and feel it, and then I'll put it off to the side for the moment and listen to my partner.
Mhm. Do you, so a couple things I'm wondering here. One, I want to, we're about an hour and a half in, and I want to make space for people to talk and ask questions and
Yeah.
engage. As far as the stages of relationship, where we, how more levels are there for us to tackle?
Yeah, just 3 more levels here. One is um, you get to this mutual unity stage where you start recognizing and feeling each other as parts of yourself. So that's like second life. It's like whole being realization, but it's two people sharing whole being realization together, and it brings up the possibilities completely previously maybe even undiscussed possibilities for mutual awakeness and mutual flow and mutual understanding. When you get that your partner is part of yourself and they get that you're part of them, you can't keep running the patterns at all, because when you hurt them, you notice and it hurts you. So you have to start functioning. It sort of forces the wake down, shake down issues. It forces the healing to go through to completion. Once you're both in recognition of unity, you're both standing on a strong enough platform that you can stay present no matter what comes, all the way to the bottom of the pile. And then you start experiencing mutual unity, which we started having an experience of years ago. And it was like, wow, this feels like, whole being realization or second birth, that unity transition all over again. But it's like squared or cubed or something, and we're both sharing it. It's a little hard to describe, but it's kind of like now, instead of just an electron cloud around one nucleus, you've got this same electron cloud being shared by two nuclei.
Mm.
And
And it sounds like it's similar to how the second birth is. You use the word platform, but like a resource to then access deeper, um, both shadow material to address, feel, and work through, but also expand into new dimensions of the fullness of all that we are, and then that's translating in the couplehood. Then the couple is actually that same kind of resource for the bond itself, not just for the
yeah,
individuals, but relationship space to experience both the depths of where things haven't been working or aren't connected up, but also the dimensions of, more union and bliss and connection, closeness, intimacy, all that in really unheard of ways up to that point.
Right, right.
exactly right. We refer to that as the awakening of the relationship, or the awakening of usness.
And there's a level of flow that's possible that we could never have imagined was possible.
Right. Well, so the stage 6 in our little model was you 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 share this unity with each other, and that gives you the platform you're talking about. And then stage 7 is conscious mutual healing. Mutual healing. Your help when your partner says nobody ever listens to me. That's the point at which you're like, I'm listening. I'm listening. I want to hear what you have to say. And that is mutual healing. And then the last step, 8, is called continuous loving flow in relationship. You're both just, the love flows, everything in life flows when you get to that place. It's a kind of a non-dual place that you share in the relationship. So just like we can share consciousness awakening in relationship, and we can share unity realization in relationship, we can also share what I call the singular realization in relationship, where you're both, nobody's stopping themselves anymore, and everybody is, never losing contact with the love that you have, for, well, that is what life is, the
Mm.
universal love. And you still get upset about stuff, but that never stops anything. It never stops the flow of love that's always there between you. So that's the top stage in our model.
So, like a river, sometimes it's going to be a gentle current. Sometimes you might hit a patch of rapids when there's conflict, but it's still there's this continuous flow of moving as the river. Your relationship is like a verb.
Right. And things work themselves out very quickly
Mm.
Yeah.
at that point, at that level. If there's argument, it just works itself out
Yeah, because
very quickly.
basically all that's going on is somebody's, coming out with some uncomfortable feeling, and almost instantly the other person is like, okay, I'm here, I'm listening. So there's nothing to push against, and there's no escalating. Yeah.
Lovely. I think. Well, there's a lot I want to say about that, but I feel like it would be a good time right now just to invite everybody into the conversation to speak
Yeah.
about specific points that brought stuff up for them. Yeah, all of that's welcome. So right now, I'm just invite everybody into the speaker circle, and we'll start with questions. And again, this is the Holy Human Club, and this is Eric Grace. And we're talking with Ted Strauss and Hilary Davis today, all about relationships and awakening relationships. You're all welcome to be a part of the conversation. And if I haven't invited you already, I'm going through the audience right now, inviting you forward. And you can just join in the circle, and we'll start with questions as people join in here. So as far as the stages of relationship here, have you found over the years working with couples that a significant number of people have gotten to that um, last stage?
No.
So it's a rare thing for people to get to
It's
that
a
stage.
rare thing.
Oh.
Like even, yes, we've worked with a heck of a lot of couples, but the thing is that these patterns are in so incredibly deep that it really takes time. And
It
so,
does take time.
having people work with us for long periods of time, it's a little challenging. They see the benefit, but sometimes they just, have difficulty, paying for our time to stick with
But
them.
it's also about people's readiness, where they're at with themselves in terms of really having the capacity to
Mm,
live their truth. Everybody's different.
Hmm.
yes.
Paul, Paul just has a question. I've tried to invite Paul up into the speaker circle, and for some reason, it's not letting me. So, Ted, I just made you the moderator. Would you
So, okay.
see if you can just tap on his profile and invite him to be a part of the speaker circle? Sometimes that works.
Invite
Sorry,
this.
Paul. You should be able to get here in a minute.
Okay. I sent him an invite.
Okay. And Molly, it looks like Molly's here. Welcome. Hi.
Hi. Thanks so much for your all's time and all that you're sharing. I really am enjoying it.
Yeah, Molly, was there a question you had, or did you just want to just say hi?
I wanted to say hi for sure, and then I have a question, but I haven't quite gotten it together yet.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
take your time.
Okay.
Paul, it looks like it's still not working for some reason. I'm going to try it one more time to invite you here into the circle and see if that works. Um, that Paul said he's going to leave and come back.
Okay.
And Bill says, I'd love to in the conversation. I have a comment this moment. All right. Okay. And Paul is trying to pop back in right now. And again, we want to welcome Bella, Rick, Ivana, Danielle, Jane, Angie, my wife, Jordan, Fune, Mason, Bill, Elizabeth, Joyce, and Eddie. You're all welcome to be part of the conversation. And Paul, let's try this one more time, see if it works this time to invite you in. Let's see, we just sent you an invite here. Is it working? Let's see. No, it worked for Molly, but it doesn't seem to be working for Paul. Huh. Well, Paul, maybe if you want to ask, maybe you could send that in the chat, and I can ask then from the chat. It's another way to do it, since for some reason it's not working to pop you up into the circle. And anyone else that has questions, you can put those there too. Can you guys say while we're waiting for that for Paul's? I'd love to hear from you, like how it also has been for you guys within the community you've been involved with. I mean, waking down for so many years in the Trillium Awakening to be not just two individuals that have had your own awakening experience and then your relationship go through an awakening, but also be in a community, for a good chunk of the time that you guys have been together, where there was also a lot of other people that were awakened too, and just how that's impacted you in your couplehood. I'd be curious to hear
Mm,
about that.
Well, initially in the mid 90s, there was just a very small group of people, and we went through our processes together. And that was incredibly supportive. We'd meet sometimes, 4 times a week and just get together and just support each other. It was very hands on. That was invaluable.
Yeah, and when we were having early relationship issues, we had the privilege of being able to be held by other people. Samuel and Linda, other couples, other people. So it's sort of like it takes a village. You know, we all hear this. It takes a village to hold a relationship. And it's really true. You know, really, relationships can almost never get through this stuff themselves. They need to be held from the outside by someone else who can hold the context and hold the rules about how we're engaging and all that. So we had a lot of that, and that was incredibly helpful. Couldn't have done it without that, and we seek to provide as much of that as we can as well, especially when we have groups going through our workshops.
Well, it looks like now something has finally worked, and we have Paul and Rick and Joyce that are in the circle to be able to say hello and ask any questions. Welcome, Paul. Maybe since you're here now, you want to start?
Yeah, I'd love to start. Vanessa, it was Vanessa's tip. She said, can't remember what she said, but touch something about the speaking invitation in the profile, which I'd never done before. So thanks for that, Vanessa. That
Hey,
worked.
thanks,
Yeah,
Vin.
really great tip. I never knew about that. I've just been beaming, listening to this conversation with Ted and Hillary and yourself, Eric. I have, gosh, where to start? I mean, yeah, I've been on I've been on the spiritual path, self-development path for about 35 years myself.
Mm,
Had a spiritual awakening about 20 years ago. And about 7 or 8 years ago, I realized that even though I was awake to the self and even though I was awake to my deepest being, I still had a whole lot of trauma in me and a whole lot of healing to do on the human level. And that's what I've sort of referred to that as coming down the mountain, and you kind of spoke about it in those terms.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just such a joy and a pleasure to hear the way that you guys were speaking about relationships and and speaking about really embracing our humanness from the light of consciousness. Because for me, I'm totally with you that we need both. We need both the spiritual awakening. We need to know who we truly are as consciousness, and we also need the self development, the human healing, in order to clear up, the mess.
Yeah.
And the mess doesn't necessarily get cleared up through having a spiritual awakening. In fact, there are many
yeah,
people who have had spiritual awakenings who can still be very dysfunctional humans.
yeah.
And so I've just been, I've been teaching myself for many years, and I've held many groups, and this is the work that I speak about with people. And I haven't heard about this project before, and I haven't heard about you guys before, but I'm just elated and beaming and happy to hear this conversation and discover this group that you guys are part of. So I just wanted to come up and thank you very much and just say this conversation meant a great deal to me.
Oh,
Thank you so much, Paul. It's so great to hear
yeah.
what you're saying.
Yeah. Thanks for saying that. It really is kind of cutting edge stuff. And so, yeah, it's going to be a relief to people like us and you and others like us who are at this kind of stage who really need this kind of understanding to take it forward. Otherwise, yeah, as you're pointing out, you know, there's a lot of traditional spirituality that doesn't really know how to integrate this, and then it ends up continuing to reinforce the spirit matter split and the self other split. And we're here to help heal that. So thanks for saying all that.
Yeah, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, it's
Thank
great.
you. Yeah.
And
Sorry, Eric. Just to say one more thing, if I may, that yeah, for me, it's absolutely crucial to have both these aspects, and any conversation that includes both of these, because it's to me what I've seen down the years is the conversation has usually been an exclusive one way or the other way,
Mhm.
i.e., a conversation about spiritual awakening or a conversation about human healing.
Mm,
And
Yeah.
for me,
right.
the middle way is right in the middle, boom, right there in the middle, where
Mm.
we meet all of our humanness from and as that light of consciousness. And yeah, it just lights me up. So I hope I can stay in touch with you guys and follow what you're doing. And I just think it's wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Paul.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, sure hope you do, Paul. And, something that I found really precious about this, this whole series is on waking to mutuality and Trillium Awakening, which Ted and Hillary are both connected with. That the uniqueness is finding the actual awakening occurs for so many people involved with that, it's the after, it's the post awakening in many cases that there's not a lot of support out there for many people. There's a focus on the finding the awakening, but then it's like, well, what's the rest of life about? What's how's that impact your relationships? What's that mean for your purpose and passion in life? And all those kind of things are really in the human lived daily practical dimensions. And Ted and Hillary just have a wonderful way with supporting people, as you guys have all been hearing about their work, supporting in the relationship and interpersonal domain, and for people going through their own awakening process, and then afterwards, really integrating that awakening into all the domains of their life. That's something I think it's rare to find out there. So it's a real treasure here being with Ted and Hillary and what they bring to the table.
Mm.
T- Totally, totally agree with you. And, I see as well that this whole post awakening subject is one that very, very few teachers speak about. I think the only person that I've really seen speak about it in depth has been Adyashanti with the book The End of Your World, which I found was a really good book.
Mm-hmm.
But most teachers are just pointing to the awake state. It's like realize the self, and stay as the self. And that's great if you haven't got any trauma, or if you haven't got, if you're if you're not in the world in any way, if you're not in relationships and stuff. But this is for me where East meets West. And yeah, it's really, really important stuff. And I think it is the next level. I think it's where we're going as a collective.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm very happy about it.
I
Mm-hmm.
totally agree with you
Yeah.
about where we're going evolutionarily.
It's got to be integrated. The lack of integration and the reinforcement of the splits between human and divine and between one person and another person, it's not sustainable. We have to go in that direction. And I guess I just want to quickly put a plug in on the Linktree. There's a link to iConscious.global, which is the work I do with my partner, Dr. Griggs, in which we model stages of awakening. We're actually showing 14 stages of awakening, or 13, yeah, 14 stages of awakeness in 5 domains. So the model actually shows how we grow in consciousness, uniqueness, mind, emotions, and body. And it also, we can't show it yet because it's too complex, but also in relationship. And it's up there on the homepage. You can just go down to the iConscious model. It's a yellow link, and you can see that. And it'll help you understand how we hold the advanced stages of awakening. Because, like you, Paul, I have had the experience for a long part of my life when I was seeking spiritual awakening, where the Eastern teachers were really just, talking about you're either awake or you're not, you're enlightened or you're ignorant, or they would just have 1 or 2 stages at the most in between there. And the problem with that whole thing is it makes it very hard to know what the process is, because most of those teachers aren't really getting into process. They're getting into, you're either awake and you're holding on to it and you're abiding, or you're not. And that's just not how it usually goes. So just for your interest, if you want to go check that out, I would recommend that.
I also really appreciated what you spoke about with regards to the relationship dynamics, because what I heard you speaking about a lot was, obviously about the empathy, but really about attunement. And I very rarely hear the subject of attunement being spoken about in spiritual circles. And yet, to be truly attuned with another human being is one of the most healing things possible, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
When two nervous systems are co regulating, that's incredibly powerful and incredibly healing
Mm.
on a very human level.
Yes.
Yeah.
So glad you said that.
Yeah,
Mm.
and part of this is the legacy of the Dharma of the awakened self, right? When it's all about self and it's all subjective and it doesn't ever escape that domain or that view, then you don't get to the relationship stuff and you don't get to see how, oh my God, until we get to the relationship, we're really not healing. We're awakening. Sure, we can awaken parts of ourselves, but the healing doesn't really happen until we are attuning and
Right,
feeling.
right. And you know, for me, this is the absolute blessing of conscious relationship, whether that's, you know, in intimate relationship as lovers or just with friends who are consciously on the path with
Yeah.
whom, you know, we can have real deep honest dialogue and work through things which we were not able to work through with our family of origin. For me, I found that incredibly powerful and incredibly healing to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the tendency to just, transcend, great. It would be great if that worked, but I tried and it didn't. And many of us tried and it didn't. And yeah, exactly. It's time for healing and attunement and getting beyond the self, awakening beyond the self.
Well, it's interesting. Last thing I'll say. I mean, I've lived in some spiritual communities and been involved with spiritual communities, and a lot of if this isn't made conscious and if this isn't sort of encouraged, then so much gets swept under the carpet and so
Yeah.
much goes into the unconscious realm. And yet, the potential of conscious community is. I just think that's where it is. That's where so much of it is. That's where the rubber hits the road. And,
Yeah.
you know, if you're all there for the same reason and you're all there to grow and deepen and become more conscious, more grounded in yourself, then, you know, to be in that kind of a community is, you know, it's wonderful. I mean, I've lived in two spiritual communities, and we're actually looking at creating a spiritual community in Sweden at the moment. This is the next thing we're looking at, and one of the things that I hope will be very much right up there is this whole. I mean, I always call it fully human, fully divine, but I love this what you're calling it, waking up and waking down. For me, that you know, this is crucial to healthy community, and I think what we've all seen so much down the years is how so many spiritual communities can become unhealthy because things aren't getting processed. They're all just hanging out in the absolute and not, you
Hmm.
know, dealing with the, you know, the basic
Yeah.
communication and the honest and, you know, again, I love Adyashanti for this because he often just speaks about just telling the truth and how
Mm.
what a
Yeah.
radical act that is to just tell the truth. That's
Yeah.
powerful, just doing that, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And yeah, most of us are deeply conditioned against telling the truth, and it makes it very difficult.
Well, there
But
are
yeah, absolutely
consequences,
right.
right? There are consequences to living a conscious life and to telling the truth, and that might be that we don't get what we want or we're not popular and all these things, and yet
That's
that
right.
is kind of what goes with the territory. And you know, coming out of all this codependency and all these people pleasing. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's very possible to be spiritually awake and yet be totally codependent.
Totally.
Yes,
Absolutely.
I
Yes, we see
agree.
it many times. It's
Yeah,
absolutely
it's
true.
almost
Every
encouraged.
possible, every possible pathology can be there, even post unity awakening,
Yeah,
and
totally agree.
that's why what Samuel was originally bringing out is that first of all, this fact, like, yeah, unity is not the ultimate thing. Let's not confuse these things. People are not going to show up looking like anybody's ideal. Of course, they never will anyway. But he basically started making room for the actual healing process. He was calling it the wake down, shakedown, because as you were pointing out, it's the consequences of all of this conditioning. You have to work through all the consequences of that. If it means like right, I can't get what I want, or I have to tell somebody the truth and it's going to unravel a whole huge chunk of my life. Okay, better to, when you get to that place, it's like, okay, let's have at it. Because trying to prevent that from happening and making that my whole life be about avoiding that, that becomes unsustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we have to let ourselves and compassionately help each other go through that so that then we can eventually get to a place where we can live in some more fundamental wellness and, figure out how to do this not only in twos or, in twos, but also in larger groups, which is,
Yeah.
this gets more
Yeah.
complex.
Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting what you were saying earlier on about how people are so afraid of triggering other people because people aren't taking responsibility for their triggers.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, it's my responsibility to not trigger you by often by not telling the truth. And yet the way
Mhm.
to live consciously and to live healthily and to live in truth is to tell the truth and to hold that ground compassionately with people so that that can be worked through, rather than not being able to tell the truth because you're afraid that that is going to trigger someone, and then all of a sudden you're already compromising the relationship and you're already somewhere down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And we all feel that, don't we? We all feel when we're not really attuning with someone. We feel it on a nervous system level when
Mhm.
actually there are things that I'm not saying, and that's creating this kind of disharmony in the relationship.
Yeah, exactly. And that all stems from this horrible relationship conditioning that kind of comes down to something's going to go wrong if I speak my truth. If we move in the direction of feelings, it's going to go bad. And so we try to avoid going in the direction of feelings by not speaking our truth. And all that does is it, like you said, it takes us down the rabbit hole. Then we're just like repressing ourselves and we're in mutual repression mode, and that does not heal anything. So yeah, we have to go through all of this process that allows us to learn how to be okay with feeling uncomfortable, and really frankly we have to learn how to be okay with not getting everything we want. Right, relationship will really teach that you're not always going to get everything you want,
Yeah.
and how are you
Yeah.
going to deal with that? Right. I mean, this is one of the major, I consider this one of the major measures of maturity. What are you going to do if you don't get what
Absolutely.
you want?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
how
Mm.
there's this whole skillfulness as far as that can develop over time, and being with multiple levels of truth, the willingness to be open to the person's truth while being in touch with ours and finding out maybe our truth wasn't the full truth. There's so much nuance there. I'm really loving this conversation, and I'm aware of there's some other people I think that want to ask questions or engage. So I just want to make some room for them. Joyce in the chat was saying that Ken that's with her, I think, I had a question, and just wanted to start with Joyce, and then we can move to Molly and Eddie as well, and then we can come back, Paul, to you too.
And thanks, Paul. That was all great stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Thank you very much.
Hmm.
Joyce, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Actually, this is Ken. I'm Joyce's husband.
Oh, hi.
Um, so here's my thought. My intimate partner is like a mirror. When I look at that mirror, do I want to see somebody else?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah,
it sounds like you're pointing out the fact that we have this tendency to keep trying to see ourselves in the other person, and we keep being
right,
frustrated by that.
right. And our task is to see the other person as who they are.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the metaphor that always fit for me was that rather than partners being mirrors, they're actually windows. And so sometimes on the glare of the window, I get a reflection myself, but there's actually someone inside the house on the other.
that's good.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's
Thanks.
helpful.
Yeah, I just want to, hi, it's Joyce. I want to say one thing. I know Ted and Hillary. I've worked privately with Hillary, who is a beautiful teacher and so compassionate and so present. And my husband and I have worked with both of them in couples counseling help when we need it. And they are really good at what they do. and really one of the few people I know who walk their own talk. Um, and Hillary in particular has helped me so much, just green light wherever I am, and love myself more. She's been really helpful in that, because I used to always be so reactive. I still am, but not nearly as much. And I used to beat myself up all the time. And I do that much less and much less violently. And they've both helped us as a couple really learn to listen. And being heard is one of the primary needs that I think we all have, being really heard.
Yeah.
Um, and also another thing I want to add, asking for what we want. And Ken's a therapist, so he's a better listener than maybe some other people. But just being able to say to the partner, just silly things like, I really want you to thank me for washing the dishes, or something like that. And to ask for that,
Yeah.
and not have someone say, well, I appreciate you, or, I blah, blah, or how can you do that? So selfish. To say, I would really like you to tell me I look good in this dress, and to have my partner take a breath and say, sweetheart, you look really good in that dress. It's just
Mm-hmm.
so empowering.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
and I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Mm. Thanks, Joyce.
Thanks so much,
Thanks
Joyce.
for saying all that. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
been great working with you too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful to have you here, Joyce, Ken, or Kenny. Really glad you guys share some of your experiences. It's nice to hear from a couple that's worked with Ted and Hillary directly.
Yeah. Thank you. And introduced to Clubhouse. We'll definitely be back. Thank
Yeah.
you so
Mm.
much.
All right. Great.
Thank
Molly, we want to come? I saw you unmute a few times. Was there to share now?
Okay. Um, I was wondering, what would you all suggest to resolving the uncomfortable, like the waiting, the time, the space that you would create in between your need to bring up something with another person, and then how long they need to are able to receive you. Like, what would be a suggestion as far as to get to that place?
Two things I could suggest. One is do some journaling about your feelings. So it'll help you just clarify what's going on your side. And the other thing is, if the other person says, let's talk about this tomorrow morning, and you got plenty of time in between, call a friend. And don't make the partner be the bad person in this story. Just again, take responsibility and see if you can get them to just hear you out and encourage you to speak what's up for you. So it's just a way of you getting more in touch and getting more aligned with yourself while you're preparing to have the conversation with your partner.
Right, because I'm recognizing how often I chose to make them the bad person because I wasn't getting my needs. I wasn't getting to talk whenever I wanted to talk, and
Yeah.
how how tricky that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so here's the sort of instant gratification question. How long can we hold on and not have our need to be heard met before we explode or run out the door or do something else?
Yeah.
Yeah. And in part, that's just a very old wounding that's, we've probably lived with for most of our lives. So the more we can just be with that on our own too. If our partner isn't available, it's like just open to that and soften and love ourselves in that, in the feeling of that, in the aloneness, in the unmetness, in the misunderstoodness, whatever that is, to open to ourselves is so powerful and so healing.
There's that part in us that's just like, nobody ever gets me. And then as soon as you start taking time out to get yourself, it's suddenly not true anymore. You're getting you.
Right. Right. And maybe I'm not seeing that they're not able to hear me right now. Like,
Right.
why am I
Yeah.
asking someone to sing when they're tone deaf? Like, why am I doing that?
Right, exactly.
It's true, right? That sort of forces you to come to grips with that. Like, okay, if my partner can't do this, um, there could be some concern there, right? You might have to
Right.
start educating your partner about what you need and what you want, and how to do the empathic listening protocol. And hopefully, they start getting on board. But yeah, when you recognize that they're just lacking a skill, okay, let's acknowledge that. Let's, hopefully you can even have a conversation about that, and hopefully the partner wants to get more skillful with you.
Right. And if it's not a match and they don't want to, then, it's a me problem for asking for someone to do something they can't do
Right.
or
And
won't
then,
do. Right.
and you've learned a lot
Right.
in that time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You're like, okay, there it is again. There's my pattern. I picked somebody who wasn't available.
exactly.
Yeah. So then
Yeah,
you get to go look at that.
yeah, it's also the gray area where we find ourselves where sometimes the other can't meet or respond to a need we have, and that's for us to be within ourselves. And sometimes it's a reasonable thing to ask for a relationship and to look to someone else to help us with that. It's a both situation, one of those paradoxes.
Yeah. And conscious relationships will kind of always be playing with those edges all the time, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Molly, was there anything else you wanted to follow up with on that? Really glad you asked that question.
I think that's it. Thank
Thanks so
you.
much,
Thank you.
Molly.
Thanks, Molly.
Eddie, was there a question or a comment you wanted?
Actually, no, I wasn't intending to get in line here, but hey, hey, you guys, Ted and Hillary, awesome job. Really, I'm really glad I joined to listen to the conversation. Really beautiful. Was wondering actually if you could fix my partner, if you could help me fix my
Sure,
partner.
sure. Just
Okay,
give us
cool.
his coordinates and we'll beam fixedness over to him.
Awesome. That's great. I had a feeling you'd be able to do that.
Yeah,
But
good
yeah,
Great.
really,
try.
really nice. Really nice. Um, I'm glad I joined the conversation. Just a reminder about kind of this two-for-one benefit of relationship as a vehicle for spiritual growth and vice versa too.
Yeah.
Kind of had forgotten about that and have done
Mm.
couples therapy with my partner, which has been super helpful. We're not doing anything now, but it's motivated me to like, oh yeah, let's get back on that track of growing closer and
Hmm.
further awakening in the process as well. So
Yeah. They
glad it's
really they work best together. Awakening
yeah,
and loving work best
yes.
together.
Yeah.
Have, have you had
Yeah.
experience working with couples with children is one thing I was wondering about, and just like, if there's anything to say about that. I'm wondering if maybe people that aren't actively raising children might have more time to do this kind of work. So maybe you haven't.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, that is our experience right there. We've had experience working with a bunch of couples who have kids, and most of them are just overwhelmed between,
Yeah,
just raising the kid and doing daily stuff and going to the job. And we're working with a couple right now. They both have full-time jobs, and they
yeah.
both have kids with special needs. Some of those needs
Wow.
being extremely high. And they both they came in to the work with us with extreme stress in the relationship between them. So we had to be constantly working with a combination of, the kind of holding that we do at the beginning of the work with a couple, helping them to kind of lower their defense systems and calm and relax and be present and get that this is going to be okay and let's give it some time. But we also had to help them understand how to manage their own resources, like how much time to put, where to put their attention, how to get help, because if you don't have enough time to do the work in relationship, it's just not going to happen. So you got to actually, sometimes we have to help them
Make it a priority.
make it a priority and figure out how to, practically speaking, make that work.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting.
Yeah,
The other
the
Cool.
issue that
Thank.
comes up, the other issue that comes up with couples raising kids is the difference in parenting styles. There's always going to be this difference in parenting styles. One is more masculine, one is more feminine. One is more, oh, just keep loving the kids and go along, and the other is like, no, we got to hold the line and make give them some discipline. And in that dynamic, it raises all kinds of major issues between the members of the couple. So we're used to dealing with that.
Nice. Yeah, my uncle once told me the reason we have spouses and kids is to make sure our lives don't get too boring, and it's definitely given
Yeah.
a lot of grist for the mill. So thanks,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah.
Wonderful
Thanks, Eddie.
conversation.
Thanks so much,
Appreciate it.
Eddie.
Yeah.
Take
Yeah,
care.
Yeah.
Eddie, great to have you here on the call. Yeah, being with kids and awakening and intimate partnership is quite a undertaking. Having done that myself, especially when they're really young, there's so much time and attention that is called for kids, and then as they get older, it gets frees up a little bit more space. But being able to take that kind of time for oneself when they're on own like healing journey, and also what the relationship is calling for, both things to nourish the relationship, kind of to water the relationship, and also when there's conflicts, how to navigate it and how that takes time and energy, and trying to juggle all those things while working and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Really quite an undertaking.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yet, the more awake we get, the more we realize we really don't want to pass our old relationship conditioning onto the kids.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of parents come to us talking about that. Like that's what's motivating them. They don't want to pass this on. And that's what motivates them. And that is awesome. That is a great motivator. And so I think it's, if you know any parents like that who are into awakening and they don't want to pass their stuff on to their kids, we can help. It's really important stuff.
Yeah, then the kids aren't saddled with those same problems, both of that the individual parents
Mhm.
are carrying that passage, but also how the parents are relating in relationship, that then they imprint the kids of how to do relationship that way.
Yeah.
So they're really helpful to get cleared up so the kids have less baggage to carry forward in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
Vanessa, was there something you wanted to share? Welcome into the conversation.
Hi, Eric. Thank you so much. And thanks again, Ted and Hillary. It's such an honor um, uh, to be in this space with you. And hello to everyone. I am really loving this discussion. I love the relationship dynamics that was presented. And also, well, first thing I want to quickly ask Eric, I love that metaphor you said about rather than a mirror, it's a window. We see the glare somehow, but what was the next one? I know I could listen to the replays, but I'm impatient and I want to just write it down now.
Well, yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I really like, when people talk about the mirrors, yes, we get
Yeah.
reflections of ourselves in the relationship, but also it's true that you can look through the glass as you get more present, able to see
Mm,
and see inside the house, inside the soul of the other person. You can start to really glean the mystery and the beauty of who they are, and
right.
also the pain that they're carrying, as Ted and Hillary have been talking about, being able to really hear what they're carrying. Instead of just seeing your own reflection or aspects of yourself, you can start to see them. And that's why it feels a little bit truer to me than just the mirrors.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that makes very much sense to me now because I've asked circles before, like, what does it really trigger us about another person? Is it something that hasn't healed, or is it something that we have healed from, but now we're able to offer that opportunity to extend that healing to another? And we can't really do that unless we fully attune, like Paul was saying, and listen, because this is the paradox that I'm having to hold, and I know a lot of people maybe too, is like we are one in the truest, like supreme reality. We are one in consciousness and all of that, but also we are human and we are individuated, and so being able to kind of make that distinction and still be at peace about it, knowing that everything is in going to be in harmony for as long as there is the constant willingness to grow in consciousness and self-awareness and kindness and holding space for another one is just very, very comforting. So thank you for that. The question I have is uh, related to the the quote, the Serenity poem, where it says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. My question is, would y'all have any tips on how to kind of get to the wisdom part? Because I do not know. My challenge has been discerning between, let's say, contentment in a relationship versus mistaken for the fear of pursuing something that's better suited. What are the parameters? Like, how can we say, Hillary and Ted, you were talking about, the willingness and the commitment um, to work things through because it creates the safe container. But how, how can I say that I'm there? Or are there characteristics to wanting to want to commit? I don't know. Sorry,
Well,
that's it.
let me answer with a question back at you. It sounds like you're questioning your commitment to the relationship that you're in. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. Well, let's all hold that very privately. Okay. So that's very
yes,
confidential. That's very
right.
confidential. Okay. So you cannot, as far as what you can control and what you cannot control the other person. You can't control anything about that other person. In fact, there are a lot about yourself that you can't control either. You can't control what pops into your head,
What you feel.
what you feel. Yeah, you can control your behavior, but you will have tendencies. So basically, if you're finding that when you drop your attempts at controlling your partner, and they keep showing up in ways that are rubbing you the wrong way, there's kind of two considerations here. How much of this is a basic compatibility issue, and how much of this is wounds that are not healed? And it can be very hard to tell the difference, which is why it can be safe if you've got enough common ground and enough strength and bond in a relationship that you can both become involved in this kind of healing work. Then, after doing some healing work, you can start to see, oh, right, now that I feel more healed, I can tell that there's a compatibility issue. I mean, in my first marriage, we went about a year before less than a year. I think it was more like about 7, 8 months before we hit an emotional wall. We could not say anything to each other. We could not communicate because we didn't know how. And we didn't even know that we were uncomfortable and that we were trained not to get into feeling uncomfortable. It was just gridlock on both sides. And so we then went into doing a whole bunch of work with, at the time, John Gray and, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, that guy. And we came out of a bunch of work with them feeling like, oh, wow, I know myself way better. And I'm sorry to say, I don't think this is a very appropriate match. I don't think we're very compatible. And we both came to that. And so, in that way, it was an amicable parting. You will have to, do your own consideration. What's compatible and what's the wounds.
And sometimes having somebody else holding you both is a great way to figure that stuff out, to
Yeah,
really see what's true and what's not true.
yeah. It can be very
Sometimes it's hard
hard.
to do it on your own.
Yeah, very hard to do it from within the relationship.
Yeah, it can be hard to know what is one's own protection, trying to limit the risk of being vulnerable and close in a relationship. Sometimes a stagnancy in a relationship is kind of keeping things the norm, and to leave would shake things up, but it wouldn't really give the individual an opportunity to get more intimate. Whereas if you get clear about how your own patterns are playing out in the bond and what is limiting you from being vulnerable in relationship without leaving, you can actually open up and bring some vitality into the relationship. And it just depends on the individual, and the situation. But having another person there that can help you kind of sort through that, or in Ted and Hillary's case, both of them, to
Mhm.
support you through that, it's can be really valuable to having another person as you
Yeah.
sort through that conversation.
And we've also done that for couples. They came to us in crisis, and we held them for a while, and after a while, it just became obvious
Yeah.
it's not
Got
going to
really
work.
clear.
Really
Yeah.
clear. This is just not. They're not compatible,
And sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't.
or they were in just completely different phases of their life, and it wasn't going to line up. Yeah.
But I will say, for me, in the early stages of my relationship with Ted, my mind was constantly telling me, this is not the right relationship. This is not the right relationship. And it would scare me in the beginning. But then as it kind of went on, I just started to feel other things. And
Hmm.
it just turned out that it wasn't true. It was just very, very old fear conditioning that was playing out. So it is hard to know.
Hmm.
Yeah, I had the same thing, Hillary, in my relationship with Angie for so long. It was that sense of, oh, this is not the things that my own protection modes were looking for to give me a sense of what real relationship was a lot of it was unhealthy. I was looking for a certain kind of blending or mirroring, enmeshment with someone that was tied to my own upbringing with my mom.
Yeah,
So when my partner didn't give that to me, which was actually a healthy thing, my alarms were going off and saying, "Oh,
Right.
this is not the real the one, the relationship, all that."
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Well, I hope that helped. Um,
Yeah. Any other, Paul or Molly? Any other questions, or anyone else in the audience that wants to ask questions? You're welcome to come forward. But it feels like we're also coming to the close. We've been on the call since 11. I really appreciate, Ted and Hillary, your time, and sharing all that you have today. It's been a really rich call.
Yeah,
mhm.
thank you so much. And thanks
Yeah.
to everybody who's listening. Appreciate your being here. And I just want to say that we do offer a free half-hour exploratory session for couples or individuals. And if you'd like to get on our email list, I'll give you Ted's email address because it's easier than mine. It's just ted@tedstrauss.com, and we'll put you on our list.
Yeah, and if you click on the link up at the top of the Linktree listing there's the websites too. You can access them that way to be in contact with Ted and Hillary too and learn more about their work. Highly recommend working with them. They're just an amazing couple. I've had my own experience with them some years ago, and just feeling so held, and their way to just invite me and my partner to get clear on what's really going on, and that permission to feel what we're actually really feeling in the relationship, and what's hard to say, what's hard to admit to ourselves, what's hard to feel and stay with. They're really masters at that in relationships. So
Oh,
encourage you guys to work with them.
thank you, Eric. And
Thanks,
I,
Eric.
I also just want to say never underestimate the magic that can happen uh, through persevering.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, it really does arise when you stay in.
Yep. That's it.
Well, this feels like, since there's no other questions I'm seeing here in the chat, where I'm seeing a lot of people like Ivana saying thank you, Molly saying thank you, wonderful discussion. So there's a lot of appreciation going around. Michael earlier also said, I'd like to chime in with an unabashed endorsement and thank you to Ted and Hillary for the work Nancy and I have done with them, life saving. Our mutual joy as a couple has been built in significant part on their shared energy, presence, spaciousness, and inspiration. That was from Michael.
Oh, how
Oh,
sweet.
thank you.
Yeah. And Bill Miller, too, also says thanks, Hillary, Ted, and Eric. Great to have you here, too. Um, and let's see if there's any other. Jane also said thank you very much, Eric and Ted and Hillary. And it looks like Rick just has raised his hand, so I'm going to invite him into the circle, see if he has a comment he wants to make, too. Let's see, Rick. All right, Rick, welcome. Rick, are you there? If you just click on the unmute button on the lower right hand section, if you're on the phone, you can, there you go.
Okay. All right.
Hey, welcome.
Well, thanks. I just want to say thank you to Ted and Hillary, and I um, I was really just blown away by the depth and the um, I don't know how to put it. I'm sorry. That's why my hand went up and down, and it wound up when I just was blown away by the whole thing. So that's all I want to say is thank you, Eric,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I've got to go. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks so
thanks.
much,
Thanks for
Rick.
coming, Rick. Thanks for saying that.
Yeah, glad you're here, Rick. Thanks for chiming in. And Vanessa also said thank you so much for a rich discussion, a lot to process, but feels great to know I don't have to do this alone.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
don't have to. There's lots of support here for you.
yeah,
Yeah.
Could I come in with one last thing, Eric, just before we leave?
Yeah, do
Yeah,
Paul.
I heard Ted and Hillary speak about the Enneagram earlier on, and for me, I think the Enneagram is a fantastic tool for for showing where our shadows are and where what we need to work on. And I was just wondering which tool that you guys use for measuring people's Enneagram number. Do you use a certain tool, or how do you do that?
Oh, great question. Well, usually what I do is I tell people, all right, I'm going to describe these 9 types. I'll just give you a brief overall description of the unhealed type in there, and think back to when you're 20 or 21 years old. And then I'll start and I'll just say, I'll give a 1 paragraph description of the type, and I'll ask them to tell me what percent they resonate. And then I go through all the 9 types, and I see how much they resonated. And then there's usually like 2 or 3 that are competing for the potential type. And then I'll go to Sandra Maitri's book, The Spiritual Dimension of the Enneagram, which is our favorite book, and we've sold hundreds and hundreds of copies of this. And I'll start reading like 2 or 3 paragraphs from the beginning of each of those top 2 or 3 types that are competing. And by the time we're done with that, it's usually pretty obvious. And I can usually do that within 15 minutes.
I love it. I love that, Ted. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I also use the Enneagram in my work with people too, and that book you mentioned, Ted and Hillary, is great. I also found a lot of value in the personality types book from Rizzo and Hudson.
yeah,
What I like about that one too is it shows the gradations, like 8 stages of gradations for each
Yeah.
point, moving from really stressed to really integrated, which can be very helpful because sometimes different Enneagram types can feel and look like other ones. So I love how that book can be helpful in getting into more of the nuance for individuals too. But Enneagram is so helpful. Also, you guys mentioned the human design. Some people are really into the gene keys. These typing systems can really help for some of the welcome the differences that we carry and make more room for them, as you guys were
yeah,
talking about earlier.
yeah.
Yeah. By the way, that Riso Hudson book, I think, is called The Wisdom of the Enneagram, right? Is that the one you're talking about?
No,
Right.
this one's called personality
Oh,
types.
okay. So they
Yeah,
must have done it in both
there
books.
is. Yeah, they've got 3 or 4 that they've done that are along those lines, but they have that in the Wisdom of the Enneagram too.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is. And I really admired that. It's one of the few systems that are both typing and evolutionary, developmental. It's great. It's a wonderful addition.
Yeah, and Michael just posted too. He said, Paul, a friend does Enneagram readings. She was a student of Helen Palmer. Her experience is that no mechanized test is particular good. If you're interested, that you can just reach out to Michael, and he can help you with the contact info too. So there's some great resources for supporting around Enneagrams, and
Hmm.
I'll gonna connect with Ted and Hillary some more
Yeah.
to help.
Yeah, I also want to echo that. My experience is that you have to really understand your Enneagram type in order to get an accurate reading on a test, on an Enneagram test, the way they
Mhm.
usually do it. So I don't find them usually that helpful. But I think to really get your Ennea type, you got to do some reading and spend some time pondering it. And it helps to be working with somebody who's really into the Enneagram and can help you understand. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this is a great place to close here. And Ted and Hillary, thank you so much for your time and just sharing your wisdom and all the experience you guys have had both in your relationship, really just unpacking the ups and downs and the challenges and the magic and beauty of what relationship and awaken relationships really is about, and then sharing that with so many people, working with so many people, and bringing that into this call here. I really appreciate you guys both.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thank you so much, Eric, for your wisdom and everything you've said and for inviting us.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Really appreciate it, Eric. Thanks.
It's great to have you guys here. Well, so for everybody, thank you for coming and joining the call. The questions and comments too have been wonderful. The chats that's been going on today too. And we'll have future calls in this continued series of Waking Down to Mutuality and Trillium Awakening. As I mentioned before, on the 28th, in 2 weeks, I'll be meeting with Linda Groves Bonder. And then on the 11th of February, I'll be meeting with Jeff Olsner. On the 25th with Margit Bantowski, on the 25th of February, that is. And then on March 25th with June Konopka, and then on April 8th with Steve Boggs. So we've got lots of future interviews, and then there's all the past content too that's on the replays. And if you want to listen to this call, it's on the replays too. And Ted and I had an interview not long ago, and that's not on replays, but we will have that accessible if you're interested in listening to that discussion too. We'll be posting it on Instagram and Facebook in the future too. So just want to make a note of that. Thanks for being here, you guys. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you hopefully soon. Bye for
Take
now.
care.
Take care. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Oh, that's